For this exercise, we're going to be using Illustrator's 3D drawing tools to draw off this three-dimensional building. Before we get started, you should have downloaded the 3DBuilding folder from the Moodle page, and when you open it up, you're going to find two resources. The first is a JPEG of all of the different building parts and also a simple blueprint for the building we'll create. And the second is an Illustrator file that's actually a set of symbols to add your trees and bushes in for later. We'll close this out and let's create a new document. I'm going to go up to File, down to New. The size of our document can be found under the Web Setup. We're going to set up our document to be the 1280 by 1020 pixels. So as far as the dimensions go, make sure you're working in pixels. 1280 by 1024 pixels. We want the orientation to make sure it's landscape, and we're only working on one artboard. As far as the title for this, you can call this your 3D building. And make sure you're working in RGB color mode. And when we open up advanced settings, let's set our rasterized screen effects to high resolution. Now when we say create, this will give us our working area to work in. The first thing we want to do is to place that JPEG resource into our file. So let's go up to File, down to Place. I've got mine under 3D Building. Here's the building parts JPEG, and we'll do Place, and I'm going to place it right in the center of my page. For now, the size won't really matter, but I will drag it off to the edge of my page and work off of my artboard so I can use this later for the resources. For now, I'm also going to lock down layer 1, and let's do our tracing on top of this for layer 2. We'll call layer 2 our building parts layer. Now the first thing we need to do is to redraw all of the different windows and door as part of our building parts. Once we've got these created, then we're going to start adding them to our three-dimensional building. Now I'm not going to show you the entire drawing set of these. We've already covered all of the different drawing techniques in other previous lessons. But I can tell you that everything on here can easily and quickly be made using either rectangles or your line tool or your pen tool. Just be sure to pay attention to the small details, but if it's off by just a little bit, that's not something I'll count off for. One thing I will suggest, however, before you get started, is to grab your eyedropper tool and go in and let's save some of these colors inside of our color swatches. So let's open up my color swatches panel. I'm going to zoom in. Let's get this light brown, clicking once. Then we can go to our swatches panel and create a new swatch. We'll say OK to that. Let's do a dark brown, selecting that one, creating the new swatch. Let's do the light green and the dark green. So here's light green, new swatch, and then finally the dark green with the new swatch. And there's also a gradation of blue going from a light to a dark. So I'm going to create a new gradient and open up my gradient panel. First we'll save this light swatch. So the light swatch can be saved here. And let's do this darker swatch, save down here. Now when I go to my gradient panel, I can swap out the white with that lighter blue and the dark with the darker blue. Now that I have my light to dark gradient, I can add that as a swatch to work within. With all of these new swatches created, you should be able to quickly and easily draw off each of the windows and the door up here. I'm going to pause the video, then jump ahead and have them already finished up. All right, now that I've got these done, I'm going to move them off, go down to layer 1 and unlock our tracing layer, and let's move this image onto our artboard. From here, we're going to focus on creating our perspective grid that aligns with the needs of our building that we have. So I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. Then we'll return back to layer 1 and lock it down. And I'm also going to lock down my building parts layer so I don't accidentally delete away those. Let's create a new layer on top of everything else. And in this layer, we're going to call this the 3D building. To turn on your perspective grid, let's look at the middle of our toolbox. Locate the perspective grid tool. Many people have already accidentally clicked on this tool, and you know you've got it active when you see the little grid appear in the center of your artboard or your screen. Now with this tool, we can manipulate this grid in a variety of different ways. But before we jump into that, let's look how we can customize the grid further. If you go up to View and down to Perspective Grid, you can see all of the options for this particular tool and grid setup. The first one to definitely memorize is how to hide the grid once we're finished with it, or if you accidentally select it. Shift-Command-I is the keyboard shortcut, and this will turn on and off the grid. You can also show rulers and have your lines snap to the grid or unsnap to it. To be honest, I'm going to unsnap everything to this grid so it doesn't automatically jump from one square to the other. The next thing we want to do, let's go back to our perspective grid under View, is to look at the different kinds of grids you can have. You can have a one-point grid. This will give you a horizon line that every edge goes to a singular point. You can also have a two-point grid by going back to two-point normal view. This is usually the default grid that will come up whenever you select the tool. Or you can even have a three-point grid, choosing three-point perspective and three-point normal view. And this will give you a horizon line that has two of the points going off to there and then a vertical that goes down for this way. The final thing to know, so if we return to our perspective grid settings, is how to define and save a grid. Under the Define Grid settings, you can set up the exact viewing angle and distance and everything exactly where you want it to be. But under this one, really the only thing that I like to change up is the opacity of my grid. Sometimes I want to be able to see it a lot more, but once I start creating my artwork, you'll see me drop the opacity to be much, much lower so it's out of my way and I can see the artwork that I'm working in. For now, I'm going to bump my opacity up to about 80%, and we'll say OK to that so I can see it nice and evenly. Also, I'm going to go back up to View, Perspective Grid, and let's make sure we're working in the two-point normal view because the building that we're creating is in a two-point perspective. To control this grid, I'm going to zoom in so we can see it. You'll notice that you've got a variety of different diamonds and circles all along this area. Take this one thing at a time because as you start to move it around, it can become very, very cumbersome. I'm also going to turn off my background layer so we can see this a little bit better for now. The first thing to know is if you need to change your horizon line, it's this one right here. When you click on this, you can drag it up or down, and you'll notice that the grid automatically adjusts accordingly. So if I wanted this to have my building at a very low angle, I can bring this up above that vanishing point. If I need to adjust the height of the area that I'm working with, I can work from here, and this is really only going to adjust the height based on the building, so it lets me align things to the corner. You can also adjust the width of any one side by clicking on this side or this one. If you need to move the grid all together, you can click on the bottom corners and be able to move those around into place. Or you can click on this bottom edge, center part, excuse me, and we can drag this up so now that I can see my bottom portion evenly as well. This is the way we would want to do it for our building. One thing also to pay attention, if we zoom in a little bit closer, is if you click on the little diamonds on the inside, you can change up the size of the area within your grids. For me, this tends to get in the way a lot because I don't really want to see these lines. I want to see my artwork. So I won't fiddle with this too much other than to just make them larger and to get it out of the way. The other thing to not play around with too much is if you click on any one of these center left and right buttons, you can change up the individual perspective of one particular edge. Since we want to keep these nice and close together, I'm not going to deal with those. I'm really only going to deal with the center one to bring up and down the height of it. Now the next thing we need to do is to match this perspective grid to the building that we want to trace off. Now to be honest, this can get a little bit tricky. So to keep it simple, let me give you my method for easily and quickly setting this up. The first thing I'm going to do is do Shift-Command-I and turn off my grid and turn on the building that we have. I need to be able to find the horizon line and vanishing point for both my left and right edges. In order to do this, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to grab my line tool and set my fill and stroke to be a fill of none and just a regular black stroke, or something that's easily seen. From here, with my line tool selected, oops, let me zoom back in, I can click on this top point and drag out and keep going all the way until it starts to converge with another point. So I'm going to click out, grab my direct selection tool, and drag out for some distance. As long as this line is going at the same angle as this top edge, this should work out. Let's do the same thing for the other bottom angle. Grab your line tool again, this time clicking at this bottom point and dragging up to match the angle right here. So click and drag up and over. And I'm looking at that bottom edge. You can see right where they both converge. So this point right here is one vanishing point. Let's do the same for the other edge. Clicking on this top point and dragging out. I want to make sure it follows that same angle. And again, it's going to go way, way out until it gets right about there. Let's do the same for the bottom point. So I'm going to click right here and drag out all the way, following that same angle until they cross one another right there. With this done, now I've got two different points of intersection. The first one are intersecting right here, and the second one is intersecting about right here. This means this is my horizon line that goes across. So the next thing I want to do, let's turn on my vanishing point. So Shift Command I. I'm going to grab my perspective grid tool, and let's match this top center point till it matches this top center point of my building. So I'm going to click on the bottom left edge and drag down until it's nice and lined up. The next thing I need to do is to match my horizon line till it matches the top up here. So I'm going to bring this one up right about there. Now all I have to do is to align the vanishing points with the vanishing points that are over here. So clicking this and dragging over. Let's do the same for over here. Clicking this one, we may have to zoom out just a little bit. Clicking this vanishing point circle and dragging it over till it matches roughly right about there. Now when I return to my building, all I have to do is adjust the height of it. So clicking down here and dragging down, you can see that the vanishing points nice and easily line up with this particular grid. And if you want to, you can drag out more or less of the grid sections to fill up your entire area. Let's zoom back out. With that done, I can delete away these extra little black lines. So choose your selection tool, select those lines, and delete them away. Now that my grid is set up, I'm going to go up to View, down to my Perspective Grid. The first thing I want to do is lock my grid down so I don't accidentally move it around. Then we can return to View, go up to my Perspective Grid, choose Define Grid, and I'm going to lower my opacity down to about 20 to 30% and say OK. Now that it's a lower opacity, I can see more of the image I'm tracing and less of my grid, but my grid is definitely still there. Before we can add objects and shapes to our perspective grid, we need to know what plane we're going to be working on so they can follow that line of perspective. To do this, locate this little tool at the very top left-hand corner of your screen. If you don't see it, it may be hiding underneath your toolbox, so click and drag that out of the way so you can see both of them. With this tool active, you can select the different planes to work on and it'll automatically adjust to that particular perspective. Just make sure you select this first before you start adding or modifying any of your tools or objects, because once you commit to one side and start drawing, all of your objects are going to stay in that perspective. You can't swap over. For now, I'm going to start adding something to the right-hand side of my grid. I've chosen my regular rectangle tool, and I'm going to set my fill color to be this light blue so I can see it, and let's set a stroke of none. With my rectangle tool selected, click on the bottom center portion of the rectangle and drag up, and you can see it automatically starts to create a rectangle in the perspective following that horizon point. When I let go, this is the object that we have created. If I ever need to move this object around or even change up the size, let's go back to our toolbox, and hiding underneath the Perspective Grid tool is the Perspective Selection tool. If we want to keep things in perspective, use this tool and do not use the regular black arrow selection tool. The Perspective Selection tool will allow you to select objects and be able to modify them and move them around and still keep them in perspective without changing or modifying the perspective as needed. If you ever need to change the size of it, you can also click the top or the edges of it to fully customize it exactly where it needs to go. So in my case, if I need to bring this down just a little bit more, I can click on that bottom edge and place it right there. Let's add another rectangle to the left-hand side. Again, choose your rectangle tool. I'll go up here and choose my left-hand side. Again, clicking from the bottom corner and dragging up automatically puts this into a nice perspective. We'll try to get it as close as possible to match that, but if it's not perfect, we'll choose our Perspective tool and then drag it up till all of the corners meet for both the top and the bottom. Let's do a final one for the top edge. Grab my rectangle tool, go up to the tool up here and choose this top, which actually looks like the bottom edge. And then going to this plane, we'll click on the center point and drag out till it matches all of the edges that are on my drawing. Remember, if your drawing is off by just a little bit, that's okay. That's not something I'll count off for, but do try to make it as perfect as possible for the drawing that you have. Grab my Perspective Selection tool, and now we can shore up all of the edges with this one. Now let's give it some color so that it looks a little bit more three-dimensional. With all of these different planes being the same, it's kind of hard to distinguish one area from another. So I'm going to go to my swatches panel, down to the little swatch libraries. We'll go to the gradients, and let's open up the stone and brick gradients. This will give us a variety of different gradients that will mimic the look of stone and brick. I'm going to choose this red brick gradient, and then with that one, let's apply it to the different sides that are here. So this one, we'll set that as my fill color of this gradient. We'll select this back edge as a gradient, and also the left edge as a gradient. With that done, now I can distinguish all of them. Plus, I can also use my gradient tool to change up the direction and starting and stopping point for this one. So let's make this edge a little bit darker. Now with my building made, let's go in and start to add all of the windows and other details that make up the building. I'm going to return to my Layers panel. I'm going to lock down the 3D building and turn off the visibility so I can see my pattern underneath. And let's create a new one on top and call this the Building Details. Inside of this one, this is where we're going to place all of the different little details for our building. Now to do this, we'll pull our objects out of the way. We need to have access to all of those different windows that we drew off, so I'm going to unlock those building parts layer. I'm going to move each of these parts over a little bit closer so I can see both them and the building we're working on. And we're going to take this one face and one particular building part at a time. Each of my different windows and doors are all already grouped together, so when I click on one of them, it moves the entire thing at once. To use these, I'm going to make a copy of them, and notice I'm using my regular selection tool. Drag it on. To put it into the perspective grid, I'm now going to choose my Perspective Selection tool, and I'm going to make sure I have the correct side selected. So in my case, I'm going to choose this right-hand side. Once I click on this object with my perspective selection, it automatically shifts it into that perspective. Then it's simply a matter of holding down Shift and scaling it down and moving it into place where it needs to be. In this case, our little door can be placed right here inside of there for the door. Again, if it's off by a little bit, that's okay. We can always shore it up a little bit later. Let's do the same with one of the windows. Again, going to the window, in this case we want this one at the top. I'm going to hold down the Option key as I click on this window and drag it on. And since I'm using my perspective tool, it automatically adds it into perspective. And all I've got to do is to drag it down and put it directly into place very quickly and very easily. I can even, once this one is done and in perspective, let's get it right, hold down the Option key and drag, and it will automatically scale up any of the other ones that we have as well and put those into place, the correct size and position. Again, if yours is off by just a little bit, it's not something I would take off for. Try to get it as close as possible, however, for your particular building. With that building done, let's zoom back out. Let's get the other window, holding down Option to make a copy of it. We always want to hold down Option so that we don't accidentally destroy our original one. We'll take it, scale it into place it right there. Then we can hold down Option again and make a copy of it and place that one right there. Let's do the same for this second row of windows. That's this one right here, holding down Option and clicking, dragging one into position, and holding down Shift as we scale it and place it into place. Shift, putting it right there. Now to make the copies, all we have to do is hold Option and automatically it will scale them all the way down into perspective as we move them along that grid. Finally, let's do the other one. We'll zoom back out, select this last one. Remember to hold down Option as you click and drag, and then Shift as we scale it down once it's in perspective. If you drew everything off correctly, they should line up and match up quite well. With that done, let's also add some of the details along the top and bottom edge and lines along the building. To do this, these are supposed to represent little mortar or stone bits that go along the edge of our building. So with that, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. Let's open back up those stone and brick gradients. And I'm going to choose one of the stone ones to work with. We'll click and drag along this bottom edge. If I need to adjust the height of it, I can choose my perspective selection tool and drag it down and readjust until it matches exactly the point where I want it to be. Again, if it's off by a little bit, that's okay. As with any other layer, if we need to adjust the stacking order, we can bring it down by going to Object and Arrange, and let's send this one all the way to the back. So now it's behind our door. Let's do the same for the one up here. Hold down the Option key as I click and drag, and we'll bring this one straight up, and we can adjust the height of it accordingly. Hold down Option as we drag up this one. There's that one there. And then finally, let's hold down Option, and we'll do this one at the top. For this top one, maybe I'll make this one a darker band, and we'll set it to be that. Okay, now close that out. Now let's do the same thing for all the windows on the left-hand side. I'm going to go up to the very top, choose the left-hand side, so we'll work on this left grid. And let's choose the appropriate windows. Hold down Option and click and drag. Place this one right here. Hold down Shift as we scale down and put it into place as needed. Hold down Option again, and all we have to do is to copy those into place, and again they'll stay in perspective. For the second row, we'll zoom out. We'll choose this window, hold down Option, click and drag it in, and then hold down Shift as we scale down. Whoops, too far. Hold down Option as we place those into place. And then finally the bottom portion. We'll do the doors first, placing those right here. Holding down Shift as we scale down. And then placing that into place right here. Hold down Option to drag it over to right there. And then the final set of windows. Option, drag in, click and drag. And then finally, let's add the extra little mortar bits along the bottom edge. Do make sure you've got the right side selected. We'll click at this bottom edge and drag up till it matches that side. I can see that mine's starting to get off just a little bit right here. We'll sure that up a little bit later. And I'll send it to the back. Again, grab your perspective selection tool. We'll make a copy of it up to here. And then make a final copy of it up to here, changing up to be the darker edge. With all this done, let's return back to our Layers panel. We'll turn on visibility for our 3D building, and I'll turn off visibility for my background layer, and now we can see our entire finished building. From here, I can start to tweak things so that the colors and everything else tends to line up and look a little bit better. For instance, I may want to choose the top of my building and have it be a different color. So I'll unlock it, select this, and let's let it be more of that natural stone kind of look. Also, I can select all of the different windows and doors on this side, and since they're in a shadow edge, let's make all of these slightly darker so that it meets the needs of that shadow edge on this side. So I'll select this one as well, and even this one up here. With all of these bits on this side selected, we can go up to our Recolor Artwork. Then to make them all darker, choose Edit. Let's link them all together. And then we can click on this slider to bring it down a couple of shades. That looks much, much better. Now when we say OK, everything looks like it's nice and in color-wise perspective. You can go through and also adjust things like the direction of the gradients, or maybe even tweak some of the colors within here. Additionally, you can add whatever other details that you want to this building. It's all left up to you, but this is what I'm looking for this part of the building. The last thing I'll do at this point is hit Shift-Command-I to turn off visibility of my grid, and I'll also turn off visibility for all of my building parts since we won't need those anymore. As a final touch, let's see if we can add some more trees and background to our building. Returning to our Layers panel, I want to merge both of these layers together so that it's in one solid building layer. So holding down Shift, I'll select both of these, then click on the Layer options and choose Merge Selected. This will bring both of those together. Inside of this layer, we need to now open up our new Symbols panel and load up those symbols that I gave you. I don't see my symbols over here, so I'm going to go to Window, down to Symbols. To add the bushes and trees symbols that I gave you, choose the Symbol Options panel, go to the very bottom and choose Open Symbol Library, then go to the very bottom of this one and choose Other Library. Then we need to find that Illustrator file that I gave you in this week's exercise. So choose the 3D building, find the trees and shrubs set, say Open, and now you can see that it has its own little panel set right there. To use any of these, all you have to do is to drag them on and place them exactly where you want to place them. Even before we do that, let's give our background a nice green little landscape to set in. I'm going to choose my rectangle tool, click and drag over the entire area, and let's set it to have either a light green or maybe a light green gradient. So I'm going to choose, let's do a gradient. Double click here. We'll set this one to be kind of a grassy green. And this one will be a little bit more of a greenish green. Grab my gradient tool. and set it up for there. Much better. We'll send it to the back. Now let's start placing some different trees all along the area. There's one there. You do have a good variety of different trees and shrubs, so feel free to use them however you see fit. Just make sure you're staying in perspective. Trees that are closer to us on this edge should generally be bigger than any of the other ones, and the trees that are behind the area should start to get smaller as they go down in perspective. We also don't want to cover up any important details of this. We want to be able to show off all the work that we've done with this. Let's place that one behind the entire building, so that looks good. However you see fit. Once you're finished, you should have a nice looking area. Again, I'll show you my original example. In my example, I also added a path, and I added a variety of different shrubs going around my entire building area. Again, you can change this up however you see fit, as long as you have all of the window and doors and you're matching the perspective of this particular building. That's what I'm looking for. Any other details that you want to add will strictly be up to you and the needs for your project. Once you're finished with this, save this as an Adobe Illustrator file and upload that file to Moodle.